First and foremost, I want to thank you all for coming. This is the largest property rights luncheon we've ever had. I think this is our 5th luncheon, and it is, I guess we hit a hot topic. I want to thank the Public Affairs Group for their direction on this. They determined what the topic would be in February, and we've been working to bring together this group of experts to talk about zoning the future. Before I move on, I want to first thank our catering team. And how was the food, guys? Many thanks to A Seat at the Table, who is our caterer today, as well as to our good friend Brent Woodward from the Hillsdale Conference Center. It is a fabulous operation, and we host several events every week. And it gets more and more, it's fully owned subsidy of car, and it is a great place to have a meeting. That being said, the restrooms are out here and to your right. And the fire escapes are to your left and to your right out to the patio in case there's any fires. For those that don't know me, I'm Neil Williamson. I run the Free Enterprise Forum, and I serve as the Charlottesville Area Association of Realtors Government Affairs Director. I've been doing this work for over 20 years now, and I am thrilled to have such a great panel here to talk about zoning and the future. There's a lot going on in zoning and comprehensive plans throughout the region. I gave you guys a handout because, well, we like to kill trees, with an outline of kind of a snapshot of what's going on in each of the localities right now. On the back side of this, you'll find kind of a highlight of the purposes of zoning, as well as contact information for each of the planning departments in the CAR footprint. To me, this piece of paper is very helpful. You know who you can call, who you can send an email to. And if you don't get a response, call me and I can try and call for you and say, hey, what's up? I don't have to do that very often. I will tell you each of these zoning administrators call me back relatively quickly. And I am hopeful that you get the same response. With that being said, I want to touch on the idea that we have some of the localities going through comprehensive plans, some that are going through zoning rewrites. Charlottesville did an affordable housing plan first. That informed their comprehensive plan, which then is informing the zoning ordinance, which is right now released and going to a planning commission public hearing on the 14th of September. But what's the difference between a comp plan and zoning? Well, I always use this example. How many of you have seen the movie Pirates of the Caribbean? Okay, I'm not that old yet. The comprehensive plan is like parlay. It's kind of a guide. And I always have to say it like that. It is not law. The zoning ordinance, which, by the way, this is the Charlottesville Developmental Code, 400 plus pages. I got 200 down this Monday. I'm working on the rest. That's law. This is what we have to operate by. So when it's being reviewed, it's important to take a look at how this will impact your clients and your own properties. With that kind of as an overview, I'm going to turn it over to our panelists to do a brief introduction of who they are and what role they serve to being on this panel. And we'll start right here with Robin Amato. We are recording. We're not live on Zoom, but we are recording.
So I'm Robin Amato. I'm with Real Estate 3 Commercial Properties, and that's all I do is commercial real estate. So been in the residential, so been on the side as far as knowing that, you know, when you need to see some zoning, but the commercial really kicks in. So I'm very excited to be here today. And I needed one of those sheets, please.
Woody?
I'm Woody Fincham. I'm with Fincham and Associates. We're a local real estate firm. We do mainly residential, really focus in litigation work, and a lot of, I work with a lot of the loan officers here in the room as well. But we also do a little bit of commercial work, mainly nothing complicated. I like easy commercial. I don't like the super complicated stuff. But just here to talk about value and how zoning and value work together.
James?
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is James Freas. I'm the Director of Neighborhood Development Services for the City of Charlottesville. So Neighborhood Development Services, for those who don't know, is the office that does planning, zoning, building permitting, and then are also the property maintenance enforcement. So we run the gamut of all of those activities. And as Neil alluded to, we've been working hard on our comprehensive plan, which is adopted, and now our zoning ordinance, which is going before Planning Commission and Council this fall.
Bart Svoboda, Director of Zoning Administrator for Albemarle County. My division does plan review. It also does code enforcement, the zoning code enforcement officers. Also, I'm responsible for intake and processing of applications, the permit applications, as well as zoning and planning applications start in my division. And they also are issued through my division. So as far as what Mr. Nielsen said, as excuse me, Williamson, I just want to let you know that we're available if something gets hung up or something gets snagged, that you call me or my folks, so they'll be the ones that run that down for you and figure out how to break that loose. The reason I want to start there, at least for me, is that I want to know what's wrong in our process so we can figure out where the snags are. We can get those things fixed. We're implementing some new software. We're going through a zoning rewrite along with the comprehensive plan. So there's a lot going on, and there's a lot for us to pay attention to as a locality, and looking for y'all's help and feedback and getting it there. So it's really important that we get that feedback so we know where applications are getting hung, what's taken a large amount of time. So that's really my focus in wanting to get that message out.
Thank you. It's important to recognize that some localities actually put their economic development office in their planning office. It's a planning and economic development go kind of hand in hand. You all have, most of you should have cards. If you have questions, this is the National Press Club model. If you have questions, write them down on the card, raise up your hand, and a car staff member will come and get it, put it in the basket up here. I'll ask as many as I can get to, but I have some pre-wired questions that focus some of the energy that may be some of your questions. So let's see if we can muzzle on through. We're going to open up with the first question to Mr. Svoboda. No, I'm sorry, Svoboda. I couldn't resist, Bart. Bart and I have only known each other 20 years.
Yeah, we're square now.
The first question is regarding zoning and rental property. Albemarle, unlike other localities, has a zoning clearance. Can you say what that is? Who needs to request it? When? And how long does it take to obtain?
So the zoning clearance is about the use that goes in a particular building or structure. If you're doing long-term rentals, so 30 days or more, that this particular application doesn't apply. This would apply to a short-term rental. It would apply to any business or change of use or change of ownership on a commercial piece of property. And so the clearance is an effort to make sure that the use is appropriate for the zoning district. So we don't have a use that gets started and then a code compliance officer knocks on your door, or a building inspector, and says, hey, you can't be here. You're not zoned for that, after you've invested all the time and money. So I did some research before I got here, and currently we're running about 40 days on average. We have some that go shorter, some that go longer, but right now we're in about 40 days on average for the issuance of zoning clearance.
So now if I have a commercial property that I own, and I've got a new tenant, and that new tenant, should they sign the lease before they get the clearance?
That's going to be a decision that they have to make. Our recommendation is that, not an attorney, not giving you legal advice, but you want to make sure that the use that you want to put into that place, that it's zoned for, and that the building code is up to date. So there's been some building code changes in the last few years where if I'm say a commercial office that goes to a restaurant, that's pretty obvious one, but you'll have building upgrades that have to be done. There's some more subtle differences, like a therapist's office versus a doctor's office and things. So just because the building is zoned commercial doesn't mean it actually meets the building code. So we want to be careful there. And part of our review process is that the building official or deputy building official does review that clearance to make sure that's up to date. So we're hoping that that process kind of lets you know what you're in for, is kind of the way I put it. So it's going to be a decision about you and the space and the availability, but I would recommend that you know that your use is permitted in that space before you sign a lease.
So you say 40 days is what you're averaging right now.
Correct.
And is there any effort to improve that?
Yes, absolutely.
That was very committal, Bart. Thank you. On that vein, Robin, what are your experiences? I know you deal more in the county than the city regarding the zoning department and getting stuff, tips for getting stuff approved.
Well, that's an interesting question after coming off of that answer. I think an important thing to know as a realtor is be familiar with the county code and the city code. And they've got unless it changes with the modifications, they've got a wonderful matrix system that you can pull up and just kind of double check what you're going to lease or sell and what they do. So that's a good start there. And then the other is just, I don't know really how to answer my question after hearing 40 days and not knowing, because it used to be a week, and things have changed a little bit as far as with with checking things. But can I ask a question?
Sure,
Okay.
why not?
Yeah. So, because this really would help, I think, with some of the things that we do, and that is when we like if there was an office use in an office building and they had a zoning clearance. If a new person's going in, business is going in and they're in office, do they not need to apply for a zoning clearance then? Because that would save time.
Under our current regulation, they would need to apply for zoning
Okay, did
clearance.
you say wouldn't? Or
They would.
They would.
It
Okay.
would be required because
Yeah.
let's say it's the same business, it would be changing ownership under our ordinance that would be required.
Okay.
As part of the improvement process, we are trying to identify those that are kind of tit for tat
Yeah.
exchanges and try and get those through a more expedited process.
Yeah. So, anyway, I think that, again, it's just a matter of knowing what's there. I think it's also not knowing also becomes frustrating because, like I was saying about having the little sheet, having those phone numbers and knowing who to contact really is helpful because many times I'm at a loss trying to get a phone call returned. I'm going to let Neil make my calls from now on. And, but once you get somebody, you do get good service. I mean, there's good service. It's just a matter of getting it. Yeah.
Great, thank you. And just so you know, Bart and I and others have been talking about those things that need expedited review, like for like, within the zoning code. Unlike Charlottesville, Albemarle has seen fit to work their zoning code update and their comp plan update concurrently. It's a challenge, but they're modernizing a lot of the code and looking for these types of things rather than the policy-driven decisions that will likely make another zoning code change necessary after they get through the AC 44, which is their comp plan process. James, I know you're next. Charlottesville's new zoning ordinance. It's a light little tome. You've really been here for the zoning ordinance piece and the integration. What can you tell us about it? What surprises are in this iteration that you anticipate hearing about? And what is it trying to achieve on a grander scale?
So just since you've noted the length of it, I just want to take a moment to also note how much easier it is to use. Yes?
There's lots of pictures.
Lots of pictures, good tables. Yeah. Yeah. So I think it's helpful to begin with a little bit of context, just so everyone kind of gets the big picture of where we've been in this process. As Neil mentioned, we began with an affordable housing plan and a comprehensive plan, both of which were adopted back in 2021. But if we go back even further, the process of rewriting the comprehensive plan really began in 2017. Now, began in around January of 2017. Now, by August, we had the Unite the Right rally. And that really dramatically changed the conversation that was happening with the comprehensive plan. And it really brought to the forefront issues related to land use planning and zoning and how they've impacted equity, racial equity in particular, and issues of segregation, wealth disparity, and the like within the city. So it led to really a reboot of the process that then kicked off in January of 2020. Now, what happened just a few months into 2020? global pandemic. Each iteration of this process has had its own set of challenges, but I think we rose to that challenge. We engaged with the community, engaged on what has really been a very difficult conversation, right? There's no lie there, right? It led to the adoption of our affordable housing plan first in March of 2021. And that plan had three major tenets to it. One was the city investing $10 million a year in direct payments to create affordable housing within the city. The second part was to change our zoning ordinance to reduce the restrictions on housing development and create more opportunities for homes to be built throughout the city. And in particular, to create an inclusionary zoning ordinance that would require affordable housing as part of each large project that gets built in the city. And then finally, there was a recommendation to change our governance structure in terms of how dollars are allocated to affordable housing so that people who are directly the beneficiaries of those affordable housing dollars have some voice in how those get spent. So then that brings us to the comprehensive plan. Comprehensive plan looked at a wide range of issues. It talks about, there's policy in there about how the city is responding to climate change, how we're addressing issues of transportation, public facilities, and all of those things. But obviously, a major portion of the comprehensive plan was around implementing those objectives identified in the affordable housing plan. And the comprehensive plan is attempting to address the challenge of how do we create more affordable housing within the city? How do we create more housing opportunities, more housing choice in general throughout the city at all levels of income? And how do we do that while also preserving the character or the soul, if you will, of the city of Charlottesville? And the end result is baked into what we're attempting to do with the zoning ordinance itself. So if you have a chance to peruse those 400 pages, what did Neil, you called it a great cure for your insomnia, but it is also attempting to do a lot of things, right? It's attempting to, again, create that housing choice throughout the city. So that means that in all districts, some form of multifamily is allowed. We're also allowing in all districts some form of commercial use. In this iteration, those are always by special use permit. The ordinance clarifies our requirements around trees by saying that a tree permit is now always going to be necessary where a tree is being taken down that's over a certain size, and that allows us to better enforce what have been a body of regulations that are set by the state governing how we handle trees. And then the ordinance also includes a great deal of rules around the scale and design of buildings, particularly in those residential districts, to ensure that the new buildings that are built are within the scale of those existing neighborhoods, or even where new commercial might be allowed within a neighborhood, that the design of that is within the scale and character of that neighborhood. So yeah, that was a lot. What else do you have in your comments? What's new in the current draft?
Yeah, we talked about one particular change, and you may as well mention that because that was the topic of the last property rights.
Great. So one of the big issues that has come out as part of this zoning rewrite has been the issue around short-term rentals, more commonly known as Airbnbs, right? The Kleenex of short-term rentals. The current draft that we just released proposes to eliminate that use within what we call the RA, the RB, and the RC districts. So those are the formerly single-family districts throughout the city. Use is still allowed in all of our multifamily and mixed-use districts, but in those districts where we see the bulk of the complaints and frankly the bulk of our zoning enforcement actions, we are proposing to eliminate that use. Now, I already do expect that to be an issue of significant conversation as we move into the adoption process.
I knew that would get a murmur around the crowd.
Yeah.
The one thing to note is that in deference to the folks up here that are government employees, they are moving forward policies that then will be discussed by the politicals. These are political decisions that are made. So the policy decisions are not made by staff. They're made by the folks you elect. And that leads me to one of my favorite quotes, which is elections matter. Moving on quickly, the timetable. What are we looking at the timetable, James?
So I know council is an interest in seeing the ordinance adopted by the end of the year, by the end of the calendar year. We're, as Neil mentioned, we have the first public hearing opening on September 14th with the Planning Commission. I anticipate the Planning Commission has the ability to move right away on that, right? But I anticipate that they will feel a need to deliberate further following that date. But ultimately, they will deliberate and then reach their recommendation to council. They make a recommendation to council to approve or approve with changes or to not approve the ordinance. And then council will take up the item. Council will conduct their own independent public hearing on the item and conduct their deliberations. There's no requirement that they finish by the end of the year. They have an interest in doing so, but I think all recognize that it will be, the timeline will be driven by the degree of deliberation that they need to do in order to reach their conclusion.
Great, thank you. Moving to Woody. How about zoning and its administration? How does that impact values? In addition, will we be seeing proactive purchases happening in anticipation of zoning and that impacting values?
Thanks, Neil. And I love the Kleenex reference. That was great. I've never heard that before. Zoning controls how value works, right? I think everybody in this room gets that concept. You know, it's the rules by which a property can be utilized. So the utility of a property gets limited. And one of the things, I'm going to wax poetic about what appraisers do here for just a second. So those of you that have taken my appraisal class this past quarter, I'm sorry, you're going to hear this again. But we do something called highest and best use analysis. And there's 4 tests that we use for that. The very first test is legal. And that's the rules by which what you can do with the property one way or the other. So depending on the limitations that are there on the property, it definitely can affect, you know, how we would value it. As an example, when you get into a subdivision, like say Lake Monticello, it's under a PUD. There's a HOA there. So not only are there zoning regulations there, but there's also the layer of the PUD requirements. So true with any PUD that you'll deal with around the region or the state, actually. Neil, I'm sorry, I forgot the second part of your question.
The idea about the valuation and things moving in anticipation of
Yes.
zoning changes.
So I've recently had 2 clients that have bought in anticipation of what's going to happen. Density is going to increase. And that is what some folks are seeing as an opportunity to increase their investment portfolio. That's the one thing about the zoning that I'm a little apprehensive about. And no offense to either one of these gentlemen, they have a tough job. I used to be the deputy assessor for the county of Albemarle, and working on the municipality is very difficult because these are often the people that get criticized for it. But like Neil was saying, it's the politicians that you really need to go talk to if you don't like the way it's going. But there is going to be more stress on inventory once the zoning does go through, because now you're going to have people that want to increase their rental portfolio, and what drives their rent. They're not doing this because they want to be altruistic. They're doing it because they want to make more money. And so that's going to be a big driver for this. There's good and bad with everything that happens. So I'm not saying that we shouldn't do it. I just, I think we need to be careful about, how it's implemented, and policing this is going to, be difficult. I think short-term rentals it's a big deal anymore. I know everywhere we're going now, we're having to contend with whether or not the highest and best use of a property may actually be a short-term rental. And we're seeing, once you get up into like Nelson County and up into some of the vacation homes out there, a lot of that, the highest and best use may actually be a non-residential use. If you want to consider a short-term rental a non-residential use, which I sort of do.
All right, thank you. And I'm told that if you go to the CARS YouTube channel, you can watch last year's video, and 58 people have on short-term rentals. I was floored that 58 people watched. Bart, the enforcement mechanism of zoning, is it all really complaint-based? Or do zoning officials call out issues when they see them, like a blinking open sign or an ARB violation?
The majority of our violations are complaint based, right? So not 100%. I'm not a guy that uses all and every. There's different situations. I did some research on ARB complaints over the last 5 years to see where we were, how many we got that came in. So since 2018, specifically Architectural Review Board complaints, we've gotten 10. In the last 3 years, we've gotten 2, 1 this year, 1 last year, and then 0. That's out of about 1,850 complaints over that same 5-year period. ARB specifically violations are pretty technical, and who knows what about brick and building and flashing signs and things like that. The majority of our signs complaints are called in by citizens. They're not, staff doesn't go out. We're not a proactive type of organization. We don't have that resource or capability to be able to do that. We are reactive, as is the nature of government, and we try and do that, get to those the best that we can. So in those ARB complaints, I think with talking with Lisa Green, our code enforcement manager, I think she determined that about 5 were generated by staff that knew about that particular application because there was an issue with it. In one case, as an example, we had an individual say, I'm not going to put this particular sign up, and did it anyway. And another case, though, it was a few years later when a tree was missing or things like that. So it kind of depends. But all in all, we operate on a complaint basis. If we look at, even if we were to determine that all the ARB violations that I just mentioned were, say, staff generated, that's like 0.5% of everything we've done in the last 5 years. So really that's what we're looking for. If we see a health, safety, welfare issue, somebody's blocking sight distance with a sign or inoperable vehicle or things like that, then that's something that we would stop for. That would be part of our proactive enforcement if we identify something health, safety, welfare, if they're putting display in a handicap area or things like that. The other thing that we do enforcement wise is if we happen to be in an area, in order to kind of keep things equal, if the neighbor's calling me about a junk car and the other neighbor has a junk car, the CCO is likely to go over there next door. So we kind of want to make sure that we're fair across the neighborhood. And also there's a thing called the broken window theory. I'm sure you're all familiar with it, where it's contagious either way, whether I'm junking it up or whether I'm making it nice, right? So that kind of goes with the territory. So we kind of keep an eye on that when we do get those calls.
Thank you. It's interesting when I was in an ARB meeting 2-3 weeks ago, and they were reviewing a BP station, and then doing so, they took a survey of all the BP stations, and it turned out 2 or 3 of them used the wrong color green or did something else, and that they did go out and work with the applicants. One of the things that zoning does is their first goal, generally speaking, across all the localities, is compliance. They don't slap you with the fine first. They say, well, this is what's broken and this is what you need to fix. And then if you fail to do so, then they come forward with fines and mean letters. All right. Neil asks Robin about different locality experiences. Do bigger localities with bigger staffs move faster or slower? What improvements could you see to the existing systems?
Well, I definitely think that smaller localities are easier to get answers to. And they move, and it seems like it moves a little bit faster within a smaller area. And to me, smaller is where, for instance, like Greene or Fluvanna, Louisa, there's smaller areas as far as with development and where there's commercial activity happening. As far as locally, I think that it's with the city and with Albemarle County, it's a little bit harder because it's a bigger system. They have more applications for whether it be planning or development or zoning applications, which go along with business license. So it's harder there, but it's also harder to get in touch with somebody. Where the smaller, you can get in touch with somebody. When you make a phone call and you get that front desk, they kind of, smaller areas will zip you off to to somebody. So anyway, I think that as far as ways of helping, and I think that probably, I'd say Charlottesville and Albemarle are probably, as far as the departments that we probably work the most with. And if there is a way of knowing better how their systems work, opposed to, if there's whether we did something like this again and there was a presentation of how the systems work and what your expectations should be, or if there's a place online somewhere, and if it is, I'd love to have it so I can go look at it. But just kind of helping us understand what the steps are. Overall, I think we all have a pretty good feel of how things go, but knowing the exact details, and then when you get hung up in something and you can't go forward, it's kind of like I'm not beating up on the 40-day thing. I mean, it could, the city doesn't have a zoning clearance, so you don't get caught up in that. But if I've got a client that's going to lease something or they're going to buy something, and they need to know if at mine, you have a study period, so you can work through those things as far as working through the county and the city. But if you've got someone leasing, when they're looking around, they find something, and then they really shouldn't sign that lease, or they shouldn't, really do anything to make a commitment, whether you're a landlord or whether you're the tenant, until you get that zoning clearance. And because and then to have to wait, say 30 to 40 days, that's difficult to get things going. Because there's some people, if you don't tell the people you need a zoning clearance, that lease could get signed right away. And it's kind of like, okay, let's hold our breath and hope nothing, all works out well. I don't like to do that because I like to sleep at night. I wouldn't be able to sleep at night if I did that. So anyway, I think that there's some other, I think if there's just a way that we could try to take a look and tweak their system a little bit, whether there's a fast action for something past going through, if one zoning clearance is easier and it's going to fall within, versus, say, for instance, the one that's the biggie thing right now is a medical use. If someone's going to an office space and it's going to be medical use, then there are things that need to be done differently because of building codes. So, and I would love and welcome to be able to chat with any of the city and I'll go to county because the county has the zoning clearance, but still to talk with the city and the county, because we again, for us, we like to help our clients, and the only way we can help our clients is to know and move the process along. So
I would concur. The other thing that's really critically important is the communication piece. I hear people all the time tell me of a application that got stuck on so-and-so's desk for a week or two because so-and-so's on vacation or out sick. And if you could know where it is and what needs to be done, it helps you communicate that to the client, and it helps you to know what's going on in the process. So, and communication is a two-way street. If you come into my office screaming, you probably aren't going to get the best communication back. But I think that in the end, especially when you look at staff as ones facilitating the comprehensive plan and the zoning to happen, and you're trying to work with them, I think that works much better than yelling. But if yelling works for you, go for it. Moving on to James. Speaking of yelling, we've all seen projects in all the localities with so-called neighborhood pushback. And at times that pushback occurs prior to a rezoning or at the rezoning, but we also see it from time to time at a site plan, where they have an approved use and now they are just trying to engineer the parcel. What is the rule that the city uses regarding the balance of the development site plan process, certificate of occupancy, regarding neighborhood opposition to such a project?
So neighborhood opposition has no role in that process, right? Site plan
Mike?
review. Sorry. I'll say it again. neighborhood pushback has no role in the site plan review, building permit, certificate of occupancy, has no role in that process whatsoever. From our perspective, those processes are purely ministerial. Our role as staff is simply to review the plans submitted against the zoning and other rules of the city to ensure they're in compliance. So we're looking at, are the slopes of your curbs consistent with the ADA requirements? Are you managing your stormwater on the site? Are your setbacks correct? That's the only things that we look at.
Thank you.
Yep.
Let me follow up. Do you have neighbors attend zoning, those meetings, the site plan meetings?
Absolutely, yeah. So, and I can't recall if the county still does this, but the city has a meeting that kind of opens the site plan review process where developer shares where their project is. And we note in each one of those meetings that it's a ministerial process. It's simply a review, but it gives the neighborhood an opportunity to raise any concerns they have, and perhaps the developer may hear those concerns and may decide to do something to address them. But it doesn't, our review at that point is strictly for conformance with the ordinance.
Great, thank you. Woody, back to valuation. And this is a real basic question. How zoning impacts the valuation process? Is the parcel valued at what it is or what it could be under existing zoning?
Of the people that were in my appraisal class, what's the answer we always give as appraisers? It depends, right? So it depends on what my client needs. When we're looking at just specific to an appraiser doing an assignment, I can value it either way. When you're dealing with things as is, then whatever's currently in effect is how the value should be done as per an as is value. If you're looking at speculation, which a lot of investors do, you're looking at doing what's called a feasibility analysis. So it does matter. And really as an appraiser, it really comes down to what my client needs and asks for us to do. Did that answer your question, Mr. Nielsen?
Yes, it did. Thank you.
Can I wanted to add something real quick for James and for Bart here. When I was at the assessor's office, we worked with what's called the IAAO. It's the International Association of Assessing Officers. They had standards for our staff that, we tried to meet. And Albemarle was accredited with the IAAO when I was there, meaning that, if I have a residential appraiser, they can only have so many residential parcels before it becomes too much work for them. I know both of you have got organizations that you're probably members of, or are both of the staffs up to what your regulations, or not regulations, but preferences are?
Yes. And there's a range, right? So our building code officials are all required to be certified according to the state. Ours are, we're meeting all the requirements as presented by the state. Is that what you're referring to?
Well, yeah, I want to see if you guys are trying to drink from a fire hose, because sometimes when we're working with different zoning offices, it takes a really long time to get information back. And that's a frustration a lot of people here that work in the business share.
So your question is more about staffing levels relative to our reviews. All right. So that varies across our department right now. I think my personal opinion, my personal opinion as director of the department is we're understaffed in zoning, and that's something we're working to correct. We have a number of vacancies all of our positions are currently vacant in our property maintenance division. That's a significant issue let me speak to that for a second, because this is one of the challenges we've been facing for a long time. It's no secret that, and I think there was some pieces in the paper about this, that pay is a major issue for the city, and I believe for the county as well. And both communities are actively working on compensation studies to ensure that we're in line with the market. We were talking a little bit, I think, amongst the three of us early before this about the challenges we face with competition with the private sector, for one, and then competition with other municipalities. Particularly, one of the challenges we face in the city, I suspect the county does as well, is that increasingly our staff are having to live farther and farther away from the city because of the lack of housing choices and affordable housing to them, right, in our area. And what's happening is those places where they do live are growing, are looking for municipal staff, and are easily able to then steal our staff because they can offer the same pay and a much shorter commute, which ultimately translates into quality of life. So we're competing with the private sector on pay directly here in the area, and we're competing with other municipalities where our staff actually live on commutes. And so this is a major issue we face. So last night, City Council adopted a new compensation policy. Now that doesn't mean everyone's getting raises right away. It just establishes new compensation levels for every position within the city, and then those will be gradually worked in over the course of a number of budgets. But one of the things it does for me immediately on the property maintenance, or very soon on the property maintenance inspectors, is that's one of the areas that the study showed was significantly underpaid. That matches up with the fact that over the course of the summer, I've made 6 offers of employment. So in the last 3 months, I've made 6 offers of employment, and none of those have been accepted because of pay issues. So this compensation that was passed last night is addressing that issue for me. It's now what people's expectations are now. I should say it this way, our compensation is now matching what the market is expecting in terms of the pay level for this job. So now that that's passed, I'm anticipating being able to fill those positions.
Yeah, a lot of what's going on in Charlottesville is also happening within the county. Our pay scale, as an example, the current goal and the first step in trying to be competitive and retain people is to get within 90% of 50% of the market rate. So that's what we have to deal with from a staff perspective. Okay, so from that response, a lot of you understand what that means if you were trying to bring staff on at 90% of 50% of market, right? So that's a struggle that we have. In order to address some of those things, I'm going to talk about kind of staff load for a minute, which is we've moved folks around within the department. We've redeployed different positions into areas. Let's say we had 2 planners doing one task. We now have 3 because there's another area that isn't seeing as much activity. So we're also trying workload wise to redeploy our resources to help with the load, while at the same time not increase or not hire too many folks, because what that leads to, as we know, is somebody's got to pay for that, and that comes out of taxes, comes out of property tax or sales tax and different things. So the county is very conscious of that and looking at all those options and how do we combat that. Some of the answer is we're short on people. Some of the answer is we need to update our process or our system. Before I got here, I just left a meeting for zoning modernization. That's part of that's what we call our zoning update. We were looking at the site plan process, and we have like 8 different processes within that. What we're going to talk to our planners about is trimming that down. So I'm not going to spill the beans since the planners don't know what that is yet. We haven't had that meeting, but those are the types of things that we're looking at. Are the steps that we have within our regulation or with our ordinances. I know the city and other localities are doing the same thing. Is it necessary? What does it do? Our new software system that we're looking at instant issue things to try and combat that 40-day or 2-week or 10-day or 2-year, depending on what process you're looking at, to get things done. A simple application like a home occupation where I'm doing an office. If you answer all the questions correctly, then we're looking at that as being an instant issue. Similar to for those of you who fish, a fishing license. You fill out all the right stuff. You tell, DCR, or it's not game and inland fisheries, whatever they call themselves now. If you answer all the questions right, you get your license or you get your approval. You still got to do the right stuff, or the conservation officer comes to see you, or the zoning officer, but similar process. So we're looking at those things, whether or not we can do that with clearances. We're going to try, but we also want to be conscious of building code effect and how we look at that, because we don't want to issue approval and then have somebody get stuck in the lease that they can't do. So there's some finer points to that, but all in all, I think between the localities, and I believe Green is doing the same thing. I don't want to speak out of turn, but most of the reference communities that we've been looking at for process improvement or trying to copy things as opposed to make things up on our own, stealing things that work, basically, is that everybody is dealing with this resource issue. And we're trying to allocate the best we can and look at process and people and the whole thing, and not just one aspect of it.
Sorry, Neil, I didn't mean to take you on a rabbit trail, but the reason I asked the question, guys, was these are people, see them as people, yelling at them is not going to do any good. It's frustrating for a lot of us sometimes, but you know, see them as who they are and what they're dealing with, because it's very complicated. I remember managing my staff at Albemarle. It's hard to do. They give you limited resources and ask you to move the moon. So
Well, I appreciate that. And the next question is for you, Woody. You operate in a number of localities throughout the state, really. How do Charlottesville and Albemarle zoning technology, how does it stack up with the other organizations that you work with?
they're pretty comparable across the board. I mean, we've got things that a lot of counties don't have and cities don't have. We've got things that we could probably improve on. Just off the top of my head, the GIS system in both the county and the city are not as good as they could be. I oftentimes am working on encroachment issues on a piece of property, and I can't rely on what the city has, because you know last parcel we did had a 6-foot encroachment on it according to GIS. Surveyor goes out, it was only like this much. The difference matters because it impacts what can be built on that property. You know, like, and this isn't really specific to their departments, but like in Albemarle, the GIS system, our last pictometry flyover for the county is in 2018. That's a long time ago. A lot of things have changed in the county since then. But as far as, you know, from the appraisal side of things, I mean, when we need to get a letter of determination in Albemarle, it is a very lengthy process. Oftentimes when I'm being retained to do work, you know, I've got an attorney calling me at the last minute. They're getting ready to go into court and they're like, okay, we need this in 2 weeks. Well, that's great. I got to get an LOD from the county. It's going to take 5, 6, maybe 7 weeks to get it. Well, we can't wait that long. Well, I can't move things that I can't control. And, you know, and I'm not trying to be critical of what you guys do. It's a very difficult job, as I was saying earlier, but you know, when we're dealing with some of the larger cities, like I'm from Virginia Beach originally, so I still do a lot of mansion work down along the ocean front. When we're dealing with them down there, they have a very big staff down there. So it does move a little easier, but even with the bigger cities that have plenty of money, and I think in municipality, there's never plenty of money for anything, limited resources, of course, but every municipality is going to have something that they could do a little bit better if you really look at it close enough. So I don't think we're any better or any worse off than anywhere else.
Well, and I'll put this very briefly. One of the questions that came forward was, are there any technologies that you can add to help with the process? Corporations have workflow systems and, you know, they spend money on the processes. I know Bart's answer, but I'll let him give it. But James, how about in the city?
Well, I believe our answer is similar in that both of us are at various places in terms of implementing online permitting software. So we've rolled out our online system for building permits as of this past spring, and the remainder of all of our permitting, site plan and everything else will be rolling out at the beginning of November. We also will be able to accept online payments soon. This doesn't seem like it's revolutionary, but it's been a long process to get there. But the software that we're working with has workflow built into it, and will automate some of the processes that we now have people doing in terms of delivering plan sets to, you know, the right people and all of those things. So it's a big and very important step for the city and a big investment that we're making right now.
Bart?
Yeah, just to add on to that a little bit, our software is similar, right? So it'll automate some of the processes. I think some of what you'll be interested in that automation is, say, comment letters when they go out. They'll be part of your folder or your account where you can go and you'll be able to see the progress of those things. And that's from everything from a site plan down to a home occupation or a clearance. And so you'll be able to track that through the process. Who's available, you know, what are the workflow steps, those sorts of things. So for me, the best part of the new program, which we're actually this week or last couple of weeks started doing those workflow steps in there. So the vendor's been chosen. We're getting ready to implement it. We're hoping, I think, in about another year or so to get through our complicated process. One of the things that we like about it is it's forcing us to review our systems and our regulations, right? And how we process. So there were steps we identified out of a meeting yesterday with home occupations, actually, where we're removing some steps because as far as the workflow goes, they were either, redundant or we could be combined with another step in that workflow. So we're looking at those improvements. But I think for anybody who's using the system from the public side, it's going to be the access to the information, the account that you create, the applications that you have in, the communication from the reviewer when they enter that comment. It's there. It's not waiting on the Charlottesville mail. It's not an email. It doesn't go back to the other reviewer, those sorts of things. So there's kind of a real time expectation is what we're hoping for, as real time as we can get. What we were told yesterday is that the update status, it will be nightly at a minimum, but email status is kind of instant, but there's some other things that run our process out, like fees that might be only if they take place after the system is quiet, say after midnight. So it'd be a daily update.
That's great. I now have what might be my most anticipated question, and it came from the audience. James. I live in the Greenbrier neighborhood. I noticed several streets have been approved for small business. We have 2 schools that are located in our neighborhood. Who is to say that a vape shop wouldn't open? Are there restrictions to the type of businesses allowed in these small businesses other than just small?
So in the current draft, all commercial uses in those districts will be by special use permit. So directly to the who's to say will be city council. So any commercial use will have to go through planning commission and city council in order to locate in those districts.
And city council would have the ability to turn it down based on the use.
Yep.
Okay. Robin, when we have you have clients looking at the city and the county, is there a big difference in the zoning changes? I mean, in zoning approaches of the city and the county?
I don't think so. I think it really comes down to space, of what they're looking for and the location, the size of space and availability. There's some people who they really comes down to location. They don't want to be downtown. They want to be 29 North. They want to be west, things of that sort. When it comes to the actual zoning itself, I don't know. It's a hit or miss of whether say the city or the county has an easier zoning for uses. So I don't know. I'm not sure if I know how to answer that for you.
That's fair. Okay. James, I have a question for you. And I admit that I've read verbatim 200 pages of the 400, but I noticed a little verbiage change internal to the document. You were talking about moderately priced housing and in the document. And this question asks, labeling the plan affordable housing. Can you explain the difference between affordable housing and moderate, and what is the goal for housing in the plan?
So let me start with the use of the term moderately priced housing. So that is a term of art that's being taken from the state legislation. So it's that on the advice of our outside legal counsel, we're attempting to use as much language from the state enabling legislation as possible within the ordinance. It's just viewed from a legal perspective as good practice. So I wouldn't read any significant policy difference between affordable housing or moderately priced housing. Now, the goal that's established within the ADU section, which is our inclusionary zoning section, right? So what that does is it basically says for any project that is proposing to develop 10 or more residential units, 10% of those units must be made affordable at 60% of AMI. So that represents the goal, if you will, is to incorporate units of 60% of AMI or better. There's also a bonus built in that allows additional density if you bring that affordability number down to 50% of AMI.
And if, two quick follow-ups, the median income, are we using the MSA, the Metropolitan Statistical Area median income, or Charlottesville median income?
I am pretty sure we're using the regional median income.
MSA.
Yeah.
And under the inclusionary zoning, is there a buyout?
Yes. So that it's pretty much the standard for inclusionary zoning ordinances, that there is a fee in lieu that can be paid as an alternative to providing the units. We're setting the price of that in lieu fee to match the cost of construction, so that in theory, if we receive funds in lieu of getting a unit, we're able to put those funds back into the creation of a unit through our housing fund.
Okay. This is a trick question, so I think it'll go to Bart. Can you explain the motivation on cutting to protect long-eared bats?
You'd have to ask the state legislature.
And will this affect subdivision development and home building?
I don't know much about that legislation. It's seasonal. I'm not sure it's passed already, meaning the time that because it's during the
Nesting. But it's during the bat nesting season. Yes, developers have to know when the long-eared bat is nesting. It's part of the plan for when they can be allowed to clear cut lands. It is coming out of the EPA and then moving its way down to Virginia. And I encourage folks who want to do development to learn about it.
Yeah, to be clear, not a local regulation.
Not a local regulation, but the question came up, Bart, come on. When we talk about affordable housing, Woody, what do the various localities consider affordable housing, and what do you consider affordable housing?
I don't think such a term exists in our region anymore. I mean, honestly, all the policy that we can put in place right now is not going to achieve the goal that we're wanting it to achieve, because our workplace workers are going someplace else to live. I don't know how many small businesses and restaurants they still can't meet what they need because there's no housing here for folks. Affordable would be, using the AMI metric, we're one of the highest MSAs in the Commonwealth. We're above Miami. Miami, guys, that's how much revenue is generated here per household. So, for it to be affordable here is a matter of what's relevant. And, as much as it costs to develop one unit of housing right now, there's so much red tape between what needs to be done and what has to be laid out for actually developing a project. And it's a tremendous amount of cost. So I don't know the answer to it, but I know a lot of us are trying to figure that out.
The question for Albemarle County. I'm reading the question literally, didn't make this up. Neil with Free Enterprise Forum refers to the lasagna plan, layers of urban and suburban and expanding the development area to allow for a transitional area perhaps that doesn't have city water or county water. Can Albemarle incorporate this into their AC 44 plan?
Well, that'll be determined during the process for AC 44. There's a lot of things to think about within that process, not just out, but also up, right? The density that's per acre, what that does to the roads, what we're comfortable with as far as driving and what that perception is. If we might be our only, and I don't want to quote this, but I'll take a risk, is that section of 29 between Walmart from the river up to the airport is probably a class A or B designation, which means that it's functioning at its design level or better. And so we still receive calls probably almost daily that say that road is too crowded. As opposed to the hydraulic road intersection, which I think by VDOT standards is probably close to a failing intersection, if not a D level, what we call D service level. So some of what we're struggling with as we go through these processes, whether it's, our locality, Albemarle, the city, or any of the surrounding localities, is sort of our comfort level also in what's actually functional versus what we're comfortable with. So whether or not we expand a growth area or trade space or look for industrial land, those are all things that as we go through the comp plan, how that transportation lines up, all those things are factors. And what we hope to do is land in the middle, because we're going to have some folks that are happy about some things and other folks that aren't, and vice versa. So we're trying to plan, because I think we're all here because we know we can't stop growth, but we can try and plan for it. And, what's the best way to do that? A lot of times we don't know till 25 years later, right after it happens. Was that the best thing? I don't know. So we can only plan and make adjustments and try and be more nimble in how often or how current we are in trying to look at stuff.
That actually leads to my next question, James. I've heard Mayor Snook mention a number of times this idea of the zoning code as a thermostat. We can ratchet it up, we can ratchet it down, depending upon how things go once we enact it. Can you speak to that a little bit and how easy it's going to be to adjust?
So I often say that this is not Charlottesville's final zoning ordinance, right? It's going to change, and it can change. We could see council adopt the ordinance, before the end of this year, and then we could be looking at amendments within the next few months after that. I mean, one of the things that I appreciate about the new ordinance is because it is better organized, because there's greater clarity in the language itself. It will actually be easier to amend, just from a technical standpoint of our ability to piece out a section and say, okay, we're making a change here. Because right now we have to search the whole document, make sure we're not creating incongruities or conflicts within the ordinance, and the document itself is a challenging thing to work with. Any change to the ordinance still goes through the process of going to the planning commission, city council. But one of the things that we want to do is one of the things that I'm going to implement with this new zoning ordinance is an annual review where we bring forward changes to the ordinance that are necessary, just from a technical kind of cleanup standpoint. Something I've done in each of the prior communities where I've worked. And it allows us to address these issues that arise, that are kind of small things. You find an error, you discover that there's a requirement that doesn't work, or a waiver that's creating issues that we want to be able to quickly and easily address. Oftentimes those types of what should be simple fixes, kind of technical fixes that make a zoning ordinance better over time, there's a reluctance to pursue them because of all the process that goes into this. But if we just standardize and say every year we're going to do an annual review, and there's going to be a range of cleanup items that we're going to put before the planning commission and council, we kind of get over that barrier, if you will, and it becomes part of our culture that we are continuously improving the document.
Thank you. I recall about 10 years ago, there was a lengthy discussion about why has to be a special use permit for a drive-through window at a fast food location. Because everyone that got approved, they all got approved and had the same conditions. So they ended up developing performance standards in Albemarle. And I'll never forget, at the time, the planning commissioner asked, what if they wanted to do the window on the other side? Really? How do you get the food? But it's one of those things that actually did work and has worked for on. Next question is to Robin first. How much is there in monetary loss to the public, realtors, investors, and owners due to the bottlenecks, poor timing of government services? Secondarily, should we increase fees to perhaps provide more resources and perhaps more employees to get the work done faster?
Offhand, I don't know as far as about, say, price that has, or money that has been lost. I think it's more that people they kind of work through it, hold their breath and work through it and wait. I mean, to them, their business, they're losing business because, they're not able to operate their business and open up. But again, they want to be here. So the people want to be here. So therefore they're going to work through the system. It's just, how long will it take to work through the system? I don't know if increasing the fees is the right idea, opposed to maybe opening it up more to the public sector for inspectors. If you're needing inspections, or you need certain things drawn that need to be or inspected and sent through the county or city, then if you give that business to someone who is licensed, I think that might be
So third-party review.
third party. Then it might help move things along.
All right. Go ahead, James.
I mean, I just want to add on to that. I mean, as has been discussed, there's this strong interest in affordable housing in the city. And leaving aside the deed restricted affordable units, we need to be producing more units that are affordable to the workforce that we need to have here in the city or in the region. And so we know that the cost of land is the highest cost for development, then construction, then permitting. And the only one of those that we control as a municipality is permitting. And from recent work with a consultant on looking at our program, we've learned that we do have a high cost of permitting. I can't quantify that number in terms of the way you term the question, but the feedback I got was that we absolutely have a very high cost of permitting. And I think that's an issue that we are taking seriously. And we have been having a range of ongoing conversations similar to what Bart was describing as part of our moving to the online system about our processes, but also about kind of not just how do we move these processes online, but how do we improve them and how do we streamline our permitting time in particular. So one thing that we have done is we have set a goal for building permits to be turned around within 2 weeks. So anybody who knows where we were just last spring, right, the spring of 22, where admittedly I didn't have a building code official at the time or most of the staff, but we were running upwards of close to 4 months to turn around a building permit. We are down, in fact, to 2 weeks today for the vast majority of the permits that come through our office, and we intend to hold to that.
All right, I have a quick question for 2 questions that are interrelated for Bart and James. Bart first, will the workflow program allow the public to access the status of permit application, or is it restricted to the applicant? And is that the case today? Can the public see those things in county view?
I think it's going to be account-based in the future. I'm not sure about the system currently. I know we have building permits are a little unique in the fact that our system access, our control of it is limited. So if I, as the public, go into an application, by law, I'm not supposed to be able to see those plans if it's not my plan. If I'm not the owner or the builder, I'm not supposed to see it. So I believe currently that under the current county view system, the public can't see the review of those because it would allow access to those plans. But I'd have to double check that. The new system is going to be a kind of account based and similar, but that's why.
James, is your answer similar?
Yeah, my answer is similar. I mean, the only thing I'd add is we are trying, one of the things we're going to be looking at once we get the system online is how we can make data about what's going through the process available to the public. So our review times, for example, but other, data around what is going through the process, make that available.
All right, James, in looking at this plan, and again, only 200 pages in, I know the good part's at the end. But have you done a build out analysis of the increased zoning? And are there any considerations to the zoning when it comes to water, roads, schools, et cetera, when you're looking at that or approving a development?
So our focus has been on what is the rate of change we can anticipate. And we did an initial study and we've done another study again, looking at that issue. And just purely looking at that analysis from a financial standpoint of kind of the financial incentive of or the financial ability to do a development as opposed to the physical ability to do a development. Just looking at that side of it, we're getting between a 1 and up to a 3% rate of change on an annual basis, which is pretty small. And when you anticipate that, again, that analysis is basically assuming every single site in the city is perfectly developable to its maximum extent. When you take out the fact that most of those sites are in fact not perfectly developable to the maximum extent, that number goes down from there. Now, in terms of when development review is happening, absolutely, we look at water, sewer capacity. That's part of the review process in every instance. Another aspect of the zoning ordinance, I don't know if it's in the section you've gotten to yet, Neil, where projects over a certain size are required to submit what's called a transportation demand management plan. And what that plan is looking at is both what is the impact on the transportation infrastructure and in particular on the neighborhood or immediate area of that development project. And then what are the things that the development project is going to do to address those impacts. So the ordinance lays out a list of possibilities, but basically that's us looking directly at the issue of transportation, but looking at it broadly around what are the things we can do in terms of enhancing walkability, enhancing transit access, or making vehicular access easy. All of those things. So we're looking holistically at the transportation question with every project.
That's great. And for those that haven't stayed up late studying the CAR Code of Public Policy, it calls for a transportation management demand plan to be a part of the review of projects. So it's always good to hear that echoed, and that's been in there for about 10 years, as I recall. Bart, I'm going to ask you this question, even though it really belongs with one of your associates from economic development, but is the county trying to help bring in higher paying blue collar jobs to help people that live here find good paying jobs here and not have to move? Do you know anything about that, or should I just call a friend?
Well, I mean, EDA is always looking for, recruit. We're trying to recruit business. This really is a partnership between us, landowners, developers, citizens, whoever's in that mix, because what's successful kind of for the individual, on that scale, if it's successful and it lasts, then it's a good thing. So I think we're always looking for jobs. We want folks to stay within our community. Some of that stuff, this is just how I'm wired, is a little bit of careful what you wish for, right? Because the good news is we're successful as Miami, right? The bad news is we're as successful as Miami, right? So there's some of that you got to take it with a little bit of a grain of salt in how successful that we are and how good things are. And there's some repercussions, some other things that come with that success. And so we have to deal with that. And part of that's our growth. And whether that's in business or in houses, schools. If I use the example that I think somebody asked about the transition area to rural, right? Is it a possibility? Sure. That's farther away from schools, farther away from resources, things like that. So there's more to that equation as we recruit, whether it's business or whether it's high paying jobs, and how that residual, let's say for service industry, happens. There's a whole bunch of things to consider when we do things like that, and the proximity of where those industries, office buildings, grocery stores are all located in proximity to schools and neighborhoods.
Right. And I noticed that recently Hanover County just reduced their rural lot size, minimum lot size, from 10 acres to 1 acre, which is a dramatic change. I think that would not fly in Albemarle across the entire rural area, but a transitional area that recognizes that might be something to look at. With that being said, I want to give time for the speakers to have a chance to mingle with you all. I want to please give our speakers a round of applause. Thank you for being here. Follow freeenterpriseforum.wordpress.com. If you read today, you'll read what's going on in Greene County, which just posted this morning. Thank you very much for being here today.